Single black dad gave up his seat for a girl, unaware her mother owns the entire airline. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Marcus Bell shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clutching his worn leather portfolio against his chest. Gate 42 at Dallas International Airport was a symphony of chaos. Crying babies, frustrated travelers barking into phones, and the constant drone of departure announcements echoing through the terminal. But none of that mattered to Marcus right now. What mattered was the boarding pass in his sweaty palm and the interview that could change everything waiting for him in Chicago. Final boarding call for Novawings Flight 847 to Chicago O'Hare, the gate agent announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Marcus checked his watch, 6:47 p.m. He was cutting it close, but he'd make it. He had to. The line moved forward in fits and starts, passengers juggling carry-ons and checking their phones one last time before takeoff. Marcus found himself behind a harried-looking woman in an expensive coat, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun despite the stress lines creasing her forehead. She kept glancing toward the front of the line, her manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. "Mommy!" A small voice pierced through the terminal noise, high and desperate. "Mommy, where are you?" Marcus turned toward the sound and saw her, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with curly brown hair escaping from 2 crooked pigtails. She stood 3 rows ahead in the boarding line, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched a stuffed elephant to her chest. The businessman in front of her looked down with annoyance before stepping away, clearly wanting no part of the drama. "Sophia!" The woman ahead of Marcus called out, but she was trapped behind a family with multiple strollers and couldn't push through. "Stay right there, baby! Mommy's coming!" The gate agent looked up from her computer screen, irritation flashing across her face. "Ma'am, we need to keep the line moving. Can you please?" "That's my daughter," the woman said, her voice cracking with panic. "The seat assignments got mixed up. She's supposed to be with me." Marcus watched as the little girl, Sophia, began to sob harder, her small shoulders shaking. Other passengers were getting restless, checking their watches and muttering about delays. The gate agent's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but once boarding has begun, we can't rearrange seat assignments. You'll have to sort it out once you're on the plane." "But she's 6 years old," the mother protested. "She can't sit alone." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He knew that desperation in a parent's voice. He'd heard it in his own when his son Jalen had gotten lost at the mall last year. The memory of those 5 terrifying minutes when he couldn't find his boy came flooding back, along with the panic that had seized his throat like a vice. He looked down at his boarding pass, seat 12A. Window seat. The interview was at 9 a.m. sharp, and if this flight was delayed or he missed it entirely, there wouldn't be another one until morning. 6 months of unemployment had led to this opportunity, a senior architect position at Henderson & Associates, the kind of firm he dreamed of working for since college. The kind of job that would mean Jalen could stop eating cereal for dinner and finally get those basketball shoes he'd been eyeing. The little girl's crying got louder, and Marcus saw her trying to push through the line toward her mother, the stuffed elephant dragging behind her. An elderly man sidestepped her with a grunt of annoyance. "Sophia, don't move!" her mother called out, but the panic in her voice was making everything worse. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of Jalen waiting for him at his sister's house, probably doing homework at the kitchen table and believing with absolute certainty that his dad would come home with good news. He thought about the eviction notice hidden in his desk drawer, the one that gave them 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Then he thought about his own father, who'd walked out when Marcus was 7, leaving him to wonder for years if he'd done something wrong. He thought about promises broken and trust shattered, and how some wounds never quite heal. Marcus stepped out of the line. "Excuse me," he said to the gate agent, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I'd like to give up my seat." The gate agent blinked at him. "Sir? That little girl needs to sit with her mother," Marcus said, walking toward the front of the line. "Take my seat and give it to her." The woman in the expensive coat, Sophia's mother, stared at him with wide eyes. You don't have to do that. I'm sure we can figure something out. No, Marcus said gently, kneeling down to Sophia's level. Hey there, sweetheart. What's your elephant's name? Sophia sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Mr. Peanuts. Mr. Peanuts is pretty cool, Marcus said with a smile. I bet he'd feel a lot better sitting next to your mom, wouldn't he? The little girl nodded, and Marcus stood up, handing his boarding pass to the gate agent. Put her in 12A. Window seat, kids love those. Sir, are you sure? The agent asked. This is the last flight to Chicago tonight. Marcus felt his future slipping away like sand through his fingers, but he nodded anyway. I'm sure. As the agent typed frantically on her computer, updating the seating chart, Sophia's mother grabbed Marcus's arm. What's your name? Please, I need to know your name. Marcus, he said simply. Marcus Bell. I'm Elena, she said, tears in her eyes. Elena. I can't thank you enough. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can. Just hug your little girl, Marcus said, already backing away into the crowd. That's all the thanks I need. As he watched mother and daughter reunite, Sophia running into Elena's arms with Mr. Peanuts squished between them, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. It was a strange sensation, considering he just sacrificed his biggest opportunity in years. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Henderson and Associates' number, practicing what he'd say about missing the interview. But before he could dial, he heard his name being called over the intercom. Marcus Bell, please report to Gate 42. Marcus Bell to Gate 42. Marcus frowned, pushing through the dispersing crowd. When he reached the gate, the agent who'd helped him earlier was standing there with a confused expression and a phone pressed to her ear. Yes, ma'am, she was saying into the phone. Marcus Bell. Yes, he just gave up his seat for. I understand. Right away. She hung up and looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. Sir? You need to come with me. Now. 3 floors above the chaos of Gate 42, Layla Green stood before a wall of monitors in the executive VIP lounge, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal tumbler of aged whiskey. The amber liquid barely touched her lips as she watched the security feed replay for the 3rd time, her dark eyes tracking every movement of the scene that had just unfolded below. Ma'am, should I handle the situation? Asked David Chin, her head of operations, his tablet glowing with passenger manifests and gate reports. The passenger who gave up his seat, we could arrange alternative transportation, maybe upgrade him on tomorrow's morning flight? Layla didn't respond immediately. On the screen, she watched the tall black man in the worn suit jacket kneel down to speak with little Sophia, his gentle smile transforming the child's tears into hope. There was something familiar about his movements, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite his obviously threadbare circumstances. What's his name again? She asked, though she'd heard it clearly through the audio feed. Marcus Bell, David replied, scrolling through his tablet. Seat 12A, traveling alone to Chicago. No frequent flyer status, paid economy fare with a debit card 3 weeks ago. He paused, frowning at his screen. That's interesting. What? His name is flagged in our system. Old incident report from 7 years ago. David's frown deepened as he read. Looks like he filed a discrimination complaint. Says here he was removed from Flight 429 from Atlanta to Detroit due to mistaken identity. The whiskey glass slipped from Layla's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and alcohol. The sound echoed through the lounge like a gunshot, causing the handful of other executives to look up from their conversations. Ma'am? David stepped back, startled. Are you all right? But Layla wasn't all right. Her mind was racing back 7 years, to a rainy Tuesday morning when she'd been the newly appointed VP of Customer Relations, eager to prove herself in a company her grandfather had built from nothing. She remembered sitting in a conference room, listening to her department heads discuss a situation that needed to be handled quietly. Flight 429. A passenger removed for suspicious behavior. Mistaken for someone on the no-fly list. Quick settlement, minimal publicity, problem solved. She remembered signing off on the standard apology letter and the pathetic compensation offer, a $200 voucher, and an empty promise to review procedures. She'd been so focused on protecting the company's reputation that she'd never bothered to look at the man's name, never bothered to read the passionate letter he'd sent afterward about dignity and fairness in air travel. "Pull his file," Layla said quietly, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the lounge. "The complete file. Everything." David's fingers flew across his tablet. "Ma'am, the complaint was settled and sealed. It's archived in." "I don't care where it's archived," Layla snapped, her composure cracking for the first time in years. "Pull it. Now." As David made frantic calls to the legal department, Layla turned back to the monitors. The live feed showed Marcus being escorted through the terminal by 2 gate agents, his expression confused but cooperative. He clutched that worn portfolio like it contained his entire future, which, she was beginning to realize, it probably did. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Elena Morrison and daughter safely boarded. "She's asking for the man's contact information to thank him properly. Should I provide it?" Layla stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Elena Morrison, she knew that name too. The wife of Thomas Morrison, the tech mogul whose company had signed a massive corporate travel contract with Novawings just last month. A contract worth $30 million annually. But that wasn't what made her hands shake as she typed her response. It was the memory of another little girl, 25 years ago, crying in an airport terminal because her flight had been oversold. That little girl had been herself, watching her grandmother argue with gate agents while other passengers looked on with annoyance and judgment. A businessman in an expensive suit had stepped forward that day, giving up his first-class seat so that 8-year-old Layla could sit with her grandmother on what would be their last trip together. She'd never learned his name, never got to thank him, but she'd never forgotten the kindness in his eyes or the way he made her feel worthy of dignity when the system had failed her. "Do not give out his information," she typed back. "I'll handle this personally." "Ma'am?" David returned, his face pale. "I have the file. Marcus Bell, architect, single father. He was flying to Detroit for his mother's funeral when he was detained. Apparently, he shared a name with someone on the watch list, different middle initial, 10-year age gap, completely different physical description." Layla closed her eyes, feeling sick. "How long was he detained?" 6 hours. Missed the funeral. By the time they realized the mistake, the service was over." David's voice grew quieter. "He wrote a letter afterward. Do you want me to read it?" "No," Layla whispered, then louder. "Yes. Read it." David cleared his throat. "To whom it may concern, I am not writing this letter seeking compensation or revenge. I am writing because I believe your airline has forgotten that we are not cargo to be moved, but human beings with families, feelings, and dignity. My mother raised me to believe that how we treat strangers in their most vulnerable moments defines who we are as people. Today, your company failed that test. I pray that someday, someone with the power to change things will remember that every passenger has a story, a destination that matters, and a heart that can be broken by indifference." The lounge fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of the terminal below. Layla opened her eyes and looked at the monitor again, where Marcus was now standing in a private corridor, still bewildered but patient, waiting for an explanation that was 7 years overdue. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Conference room C. The agents told him someone wanted to thank him personally for his kindness." Layla straightened her blazer and checked her reflection in the window. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the evening." "And David?" "Yes, ma'am. Find out everything about his current situation. Where he was going, why it mattered, what he needs." She paused at the elevator, her hand on the button. "And get me Elena Morrison on the phone. I think it's time she learned who her guardian angel really is." The elevator descended in silence, but Layla's mind was anything but quiet. Each floor that passed brought back another memory, Another decision she'd made in boardrooms that felt so far removed from the human cost. By the time she reached the executive offices on the ground level, her hands were trembling. Novawing's headquarters occupied the entire east wing of Dallas International, a gleaming testament to her grandfather's vision and her father's expansion. But tonight, walking through the polished corridors lined with awards and achievement photos, Layla felt like she was seeing it all for the first time through Marcus Bell's eyes. Her corner office overlooked the runways where planes took off and landed in precise choreography, carrying millions of passengers to their destinations each year. She'd always found it calming, this view of organized efficiency. Tonight, it felt like watching toy planes shuffle ant-sized people who didn't matter. David was already there, having taken the express elevator, his laptop open and files scattered across her mahogany desk. "I've pulled everything," he said without preamble. Marcus Bell, age 34, licensed architect, single father to Jalen Bell, age 8. Currently unemployed for 6 months after his firm downsized. Layla sank into her leather chair, the weight of the information settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. What about Chicago? Why was he going there? Henderson and Associates. Senior architect position. Interview scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. David's voice grew softer. "Ma'am, I made some calls. It's a competitive position. They're only interviewing 3 candidates, and his slot was specifically requested by the head of the firm. Apparently, someone recommended him based on some community work he did after Hurricane Maria, designing temporary housing for displaced families. For free? Completely pro bono. Spent 4 months in Puerto Rico, living in a FEMA trailer, working 18-hour days." David scrolled through his notes. There's more. After his mother's funeral, the one he missed because of our mistake, he used his own savings to establish a small scholarship fund in her name for underprivileged kids interested in architecture. Layla felt something crack inside her chest. She turned to the window, watching a plane taxi toward takeoff, its lights blinking against the darkening sky. "Show me the original incident report." "All of it." David hesitated. "Ma'am, some of the details are." "All of it, David." The silence stretched for a long moment before David began reading from his laptop. Security report, June 15, 2018. Subject detained at Gate 31 after name match with watch list. Subject became agitated when separated from carry-on luggage containing. He paused. "Containing what?" "His mother's ashes," David whispered. "He was traveling with her ashes, ma'am. That's why he became upset when they took his carry-on. They thought his emotional response was suspicious behavior." Layla's eyes closed as the full horror of it washed over her. A grieving son, carrying his mother's remains, detained for 6 hours because someone in her security department couldn't be bothered to check a middle initial. She thought of her own mother's funeral just 2 years ago, how devastating it would have been to miss those final moments of goodbye. "There's something else," David continued reluctantly. "The letter he sent, there's more of it. The part 1 didn't read upstairs. Tell me." He wrote, "I work in a profession that builds structures meant to last, to shelter and protect people for generations. I believe corporations should be built the same way, on foundations of integrity and walls of compassion. Today, I learned that your company is built on sand, and when the storms come, it will not stand. I hope for your sake, and for the thousands of people who trust you with their journeys, that someone with courage will choose to rebuild before it's too late." The words hit Layla like physical blows. She remembered being so angry when that letter first crossed her desk, so indignant that this nobody passenger dared to lecture her about business. She'd instructed legal to send the standard settlement offer and file the letter away where it couldn't cause trouble. Now she realized Marcus had been right. Novawings was built on sand, and she'd spent 7 years ignoring the cracks in the foundation. Her phone rang, cutting through the silence. David glanced at the caller ID and straightened. "It's Elena Morrison." Layla took a deep breath and answered. "Mrs. Morrison." "Ms. Green, thank you for taking my call." Elena's voice was warm but strained. "I wanted to talk about the man who helped my daughter tonight. Marcus Bell." My assistant said you're handling his situation personally? Yes, I am. Good. Because I've been thinking about what happened, and I realize I never got to properly thank him. He disappeared so quickly after. Elena paused. Ms. Green, my husband and I have resources. Whatever Mr. Bell needs, if he lost money on the flight, if there are hotel costs, anything, we want to help. Layla stared at the incident report on her screen, at the photo of Marcus from 7 years ago, younger, hopeful, probably still believing the world was fundamentally fair. Mrs. Morrison, what would you say if I told you that Mr. Bell's kindness tonight wasn't the first time our paths have crossed? I'm not sure I understand. 7 years ago, your guardian angel filed a complaint against this airline. We failed him then, spectacularly. Tonight, he saved your daughter without knowing that doing so would bring him back into contact with the very company that once broke his heart. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly a minute. When Elena spoke again, her voice was different, sharper, more focused. Ms. Green, I think you and I need to have a very different conversation. Where is Mr. Bell now? Waiting in a conference room downstairs, probably wondering if he's in some kind of trouble. And where should he be? Layla looked at her watch. 8:47 p.m. On a plane to Chicago, preparing for the most important interview of his career. Then I suggest you figure out how to fix that, Elena said quietly. Because Ms. Green, my husband's company doesn't just have a travel contract with Novawings. We're also your third largest shareholder. And I'm about to become very interested in how this airline treats people who show kindness to little girls and their mothers. The line went dead, leaving Layla staring at her phone with a mixture of fear and something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She turned to David, who had gone pale during the conversation. Cancel all tomorrow's meetings, she said, standing up and straightening her jacket. And call our charter division. I want a plane ready in 30 minutes. Ma'am, where are we going? Layla was already heading for the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor with new purpose. To Chicago, David. We're going to make sure Marcus Bell makes his interview on time. And then we're going to have a conversation that's 7 years overdue. Conference room C was smaller than Marcus had expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac and a single oval table surrounded by plush chairs. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, watching planes taxi past while trying to figure out what was happening. The gate agents who'd escorted him had been polite but vague, saying only that someone important wanted to thank him personally. His phone buzzed for the 5th time, another call from Henderson and Associates that he couldn't bring himself to answer. How do you explain that you gave away your future for a stranger's child? How do you make someone understand that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting the consequences, no matter how devastating? The door opened, and Marcus looked up expecting to see an airline executive in a stuffy suit. Instead, a woman in her early 30s entered, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and her business attire somehow managing to look both professional and approachable. She carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression that seemed oddly nervous for someone who was supposed to be thanking him. Mr. Bell? I'm Sarah Chin, Novawings Customer Relations. She extended her hand with a warm smile. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did tonight. Your kindness to that little girl was remarkable. Marcus shook her hand, confused. I appreciate that, but honestly, it wasn't a big deal. Any parent would have done the same thing. Sarah sat across from him, opening her portfolio. Actually, Mr. Bell, that's not true. We've reviewed the security footage, and at least 15 other passengers witnessed what was happening. You were the only one who stepped forward. Look, Ms. Chin, I appreciate the thanks, but I really need to figure out how to get to Chicago. I have an important meeting tomorrow and… About that, Sarah interrupted gently. We understand your situation, and Novawings would like to make this right. We've arranged alternative transportation for you. Marcus felt a spark of hope. There's another flight tonight? Something better. Sarah slid a thick envelope across the table. We've chartered a private jet for you. It's waiting at our executive terminal right now. You'll arrive in Chicago with plenty of time to rest before your interview. Marcus stared at the envelope like it might explode. I'm sorry, what? A private jet? For me? That has to cost more than my car is worth. Mr. Bell, what you did tonight went far beyond simple kindness. You sacrificed something important to help a family in need. Nova Wings believes in recognizing that kind of character. Marcus opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a boarding pass for a charter flight, a voucher for a luxury hotel suite in Chicago, and what looked like a first-class upgrade certificate for future travel. This is too much. Way too much. I can't accept this. You can and you will, Sarah said firmly but kindly. There's just one condition. Marcus looked up sharply. What kind of condition? The person who arranged this would like to meet you. Briefly. Just to shake your hand and thank you personally. Sarah checked her watch. They're actually on their way to the airport now. Something about her tone made Marcus uneasy. Who is it? Some kind of VIP? Before Sarah could answer, the conference room door opened again. A tall woman in an expensive blazer entered, followed by a younger man carrying a tablet. The woman's presence immediately changed the energy in the room. There was something about her that commanded attention, a quiet authority that came from being used to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Mr. Bell, the woman said, her voice carrying the slightest tremor. My name is Layla Green. I'm the CEO of Nova Wings Airlines. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The CEO? What could the CEO possibly want with him? He stood up awkwardly, still clutching the envelope. Ms. Green. This is unexpected. Layla studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she was looking for something specific. Mr. Bell, I want you to know that what you did tonight, giving up your seat for that little girl, it reminded me why I fell in love with aviation in the first place. The idea that we can bring people together, help them reach the moments that matter most. That's very kind of you to say, but I also want you to know, Layla continued, her voice growing steadier, that Nova Wings has a long-standing policy of recognizing exceptional acts of kindness by our passengers. The charter flight, the hotel, the future travel benefits, they're yours, no strings attached. Marcus looked between Layla and Sarah, feeling like he was missing something important. This is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why? I mean, people give up seats all the time, right? Layla exchanged a quick glance with the man beside her. Actually, Mr. Bell, they don't. Not when it costs them something as important as a job interview. Not when they disappear into the crowd without looking for recognition or reward. She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. You wrote us a letter once. About dignity and compassion in air travel. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. You know about that? I know about a lot of things, Mr. Bell. And I think it's time we had an honest conversation. Layla gestured toward the chairs. But first, I want to make sure you understand that charter flight is waiting for you regardless of what we discuss here. Your interview tomorrow is going to happen. I give you my word. Marcus sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. The CEO of Nova Wings knew about his complaint from 7 years ago. She was offering him what amounted to thousands of dollars in travel benefits. And she wanted to have an honest conversation about something that had nearly broken his faith in corporate justice. Ms. Green, he said slowly, with all due respect, I don't understand what's happening here. Layla sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. For the first time since she'd entered the room, she looked vulnerable. What's happening, Mr. Bell, is that sometimes the universe gives us a chance to fix our mistakes. And 7 years ago, I made a very big mistake involving you. Marcus felt his heart begin to race. What kind of mistake? The kind that taught me the difference between running a business and running a company that deserves the trust people place in it. Layla looked directly into his eyes. Mr. Bell, I was the executive who signed off on your case being buried. And tonight, watching you sacrifice your future for a stranger's child, I realized that you weren't just right about what happened to you, you were right about what was wrong with us. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of jet engines and Marcus's own thundering heartbeat. Everything clicked into place: the excessive generosity, the personal attention, the way Layla had been studying his face. This wasn't about recognizing kindness. This was about guilt. "You're trying to buy me off," he said quietly. "No," Layla replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to figure out how to apologize for something that can't be forgiven." 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in the waiting area of Novawing's corporate headquarters, wearing his best suit, the same one he'd worn to Chicago, where the interview had gone better than he'd ever imagined. The charter flight had been surreal, with leather seats wider than his apartment's couch and a flight attendant who treated him like royalty. He'd arrived rested, confident, and somehow transformed by the experience. The Henderson and Associates interview had lasted 3 hours instead of the scheduled one. They'd offered him the position on the spot, with a salary that would change everything for him and Jalen. But something about that night at the airport, about Layla Green's raw admission of guilt, had stayed with him through every handshake and contract negotiation. Now he was back, having accepted another invitation that had arrived via certified mail 3 days after he'd signed his new employment contract. The letter had been handwritten, not typed, unusual for a corporate communication. It had simply said, "Mr. Bell, I believe we have more to discuss. Would you be willing to meet with me once more? This time, I promise complete honesty. Mr. Bell?" A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Sarah Chin approached, but this time she looked different, more genuine, less like she was playing a role. "Ms. Green is ready for you. And Mr. Bell? Thank you for coming back." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, but Marcus felt the weight of possibility in the air. When the doors opened, he was surprised to find Layla waiting for him personally, not hidden behind a receptionist or assistant. "Marcus," she said, and the use of his first name felt significant. "Thank you for agreeing to see me again. How did the interview go?" "I got the job," he said simply. "I'm glad." And she looked genuinely relieved. "Walk with me." They moved through the corporate offices, past conference rooms and executive suites, until they reached a door Marcus hadn't seen during his previous visit. Layla opened it to reveal a spacious boardroom with a stunning view of the airport. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the view. It was the wall covered with passenger feedback letters, complaint files, and what looked like policy documents. "Over the past 2 weeks," Layla began, "I've been conducting what you might call an audit of our soul. Every complaint from the past 5 years, every passenger incident, every time we chose procedure over people." She gestured to the wall. "Your letter from 7 years ago isn't an anomaly, Marcus. It's a pattern." Marcus studied the wall, seeing dozens of stories similar to his own: families separated, travelers stranded, people treated like cargo instead of human beings. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need your help." Layla moved to stand beside him, both of them facing the overwhelming evidence of systemic failure. 2 weeks ago, you asked me if I was trying to buy you off. The honest answer is that I started with that intention. Guilt is a powerful motivator, and I thought enough money could ease my conscience. And now I realize that my conscience isn't what needs fixing. It's the entire way this airline thinks about the people we serve. Layla turned to face him directly. "Marcus, I want to offer you a position. Not as charity, not as guilt money, but because I believe you're the only person who can help us become the company we should have been all along." Marcus felt his heart skip. "I just accepted a job. A good job. One that will take care of my son." "I know. And I'm not asking you to give that up." Layla walked to the head of the conference table, where a folder waited. "I'm asking you to consider taking on something additional. Something that could change how an entire industry treats people." She opened the folder and slid it across the table. Marcus approached cautiously and read the title page. Head of Passenger Advocacy, Novawings Airlines. "It's a new position," Layla explained. "You would have complete authority to investigate passenger complaints, reform policies that prioritize efficiency over humanity, and rebuild our customer relations from the ground up. You'd report directly to me, with your own budget and staff." Marcus flipped through the pages, his architect's mind automatically analyzing the structure and scope of what was being proposed. This is comprehensive. You're talking about changing fundamental operational procedures. Yes. And it would be a part-time position, at least initially. You could keep your job at Henderson and Associates, work with us on weekends and evenings. The salary alone would be... She named a figure that made Marcus's hands shake. Why me? He asked quietly. You could hire any number of customer service experts, people with MBAs and corporate experience. Because they would try to fix the system from within the system, Layla replied. You would fix it from the perspective of someone who's been broken by it. Because when you wrote that letter 7 years ago, you saw something that all our consultants and analysts missed, that we'd forgotten we were in the business of serving human beings. Marcus closed the folder and looked out at the airport, where planes continued their endless dance of departure and arrival. He thought about his mother's funeral, about sitting in that detention room while her ashes waited in confiscated luggage. He thought about little Sophia crying in the boarding line, and about his own son, who deserved to grow up in a world where kindness mattered more than procedures. There's something else, Layla said softly. Elena Morrison, Sophia's mother, she wants to fund an emergency travel assistance program. For people facing family crises, medical emergencies, situations where getting home matters more than profit margins. She asked specifically that you oversee it. She doesn't even know me. She knows enough. She knows you gave up your future for her daughter without expecting anything in return. She knows that's the kind of person she wants making decisions about who deserves help when they need it most. Marcus opened the folder again, reading more carefully this time. The scope was ambitious, a complete restructuring of how Novawings handled passenger relations, with the power to implement real change. It was the kind of position that could affect thousands of lives, the kind of work that could turn his personal tragedy into systematic healing. If I said yes, he said carefully, what would be my first assignment? Layla smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Training our entire customer service staff on a new protocol I'm calling the Marcus Bell Standard. Every interaction, every decision, every policy gets filtered through one simple question. How would we want to be treated if this were our family? Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a sense of purpose clicking into place like the final piece of a complex architectural puzzle. When would you need an answer? Take your time. Talk to your son, think about what this would mean for your family. But Marcus? Layla extended her hand. Whatever you decide, thank you for showing me that some mistakes can be transformed into something better, if we're brave enough to try. As Marcus shook her hand, he realized that 7 years ago, he'd written a letter predicting that Novawings would fall if it didn't change. Today, he was being offered the chance to help build something better from the ground up. Ms. Green, he said, I think we should talk about how to make airlines remember they're in the business of bringing families home. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the boarding gate of Novawings Flight 100, watching as passengers filed onto what the airline was calling their Dignity in the Skies inaugural flight. The aircraft gleamed under the terminal lights, its fuselage adorned with a simple but powerful message. Every passenger has a story. Dad, is that really our seats? Jalen Bell pressed his face against the gate window, his 8-year-old eyes wide with wonder. 1A and 1B? That's first class. Marcus smiled, adjusting his son's backpack strap. That's right, buddy. Today we're flying first class. But the seats weren't what made this flight special. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had worked tirelessly alongside Layla and her team to transform not just policies, but the very culture of Novawings Airlines. The Marcus Bell Standard had become more than a protocol. It had become a philosophy that rippled through every department, every decision, every interaction with passengers. Mr. Bell? A young flight attendant approached, her name tag reading, Maria Santos, Customer Care Advocate. It was a new position Marcus had helped create. Frontline employees specifically trained to identify and assist passengers facing difficulties. Ms. Green asked me to let you know that Mrs. Morrison and Sophia are already on board. Marcus nodded, remembering the little girl whose tears had started this entire journey. Sophia was now 7, and according to Elena, she still carried Mr. Peanuts on every flight, telling other children about the nice man who gave up his seat so she could sit with her mommy. As they boarded the plane, Marcus was struck by the subtle but significant changes throughout the aircraft. The gate agents hadn't just checked tickets. They'd asked passengers about their travel experience, offering assistance with connections and providing information about services for families with special needs. The boarding process itself had been redesigned to prioritize human dignity over efficiency metrics. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bell." The voice belonged to Captain Jennifer Hayes, Novawing's first female chief pilot, whom Layla had promoted as part of the company's broader commitment to elevating voices that had been historically marginalized. "I wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done. My daughter was bumped from a flight last year during a family emergency, and the way our crew handled it then versus how they would handle it now, it's like night and day." Marcus felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing his work was making a real difference. In 6 months, passenger complaints had dropped by 60%, but more importantly, the nature of the complaints had changed. Instead of letters filled with anger and frustration, they now received feedback about specific ways to improve service, often accompanied by praise for staff members who had gone above and beyond. "Marcus!" Elena Morrison stood up from her seat in business class, Sophia beside her clutching the same stuffed elephant. "There's our guardian angel!" Sophia ran down the aisle, wrapping her arms around Marcus's waist. "Mr. Marcus! Mommy says you're the reason flying is nicer now." "Well," Marcus said, kneeling to her level, "I had a lot of help. And it all started because you needed to sit with your mommy." As passengers settled into their seats, Marcus noticed something that would have been impossible 6 months ago. An elderly gentleman in economy was struggling with his carry-on, and without being asked, 3 different passengers and 2 crew members moved to help him. A mother traveling alone with twins was seamlessly assisted by flight attendants who had been trained to recognize the signs of a stressed parent. 2 teenagers who looked nervous about flying were approached by a customer care advocate who spent several minutes explaining what they could expect during takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the voice over the intercom. "Welcome aboard Novawings Flight 100, our inaugural Dignity in the Skies service. Before we begin our journey today, I want to share something special with you. 6 months ago, a passenger on one of our flights made a choice that reminded us why we're really here, not just to move people from point A to point B, but to honor the fact that every person who steps onto our aircraft is traveling towards something important to them." Marcus felt Jalen's hand slip into his as the captain continued. "That passenger's name is Marcus Bell, and he's with us today in seat 1A. Mr. Bell, along with our CEO Layla Green and passenger advocate Elena Morrison, has helped transform Novawings into an airline that remembers every passenger has a story, a destination that matters, and a heart that deserves to be treated with dignity." The entire cabin erupted in applause, and Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears. But they weren't tears of sadness or old pain. They were tears of hope, of redemption, of a future where kindness could actually change systems. Layla appeared from the cockpit, having insisted on personally conducting the pre-flight safety demonstration. As she moved through the cabin, Marcus watched her interact with passengers, not as a CEO going through motions, but as someone who genuinely understood that each person represented a family, a dream, a story that mattered. As the plane lifted off, Marcus looked out the window at the city below, thinking about his mother's funeral that he'd missed 7 years ago, about the letter he'd written in anger and grief, about a little girl's tears that had somehow become the catalyst for an entire industry to remember its humanity. "Dad," Jalen said softly, "you did something pretty cool, didn't you?" Marcus squeezed his son's hand as the plane climbed toward the clouds. "We all did something cool, buddy. We remembered that being kind to strangers isn't just the right thing to do, sometimes it's the thing that changes everything." Below them, the lights of Dallas faded into the distance, but ahead lay destinations filled with families reuniting, dreams being pursued, and stories continuing to unfold, all carried by an airline that had learned to fly with dignity.